Yeah, he's still up there. See him? There he goes. Oh. It's funny, he doesn't seem to be afraid of people at all. Why don't you not too rowdy? We still got a sunny spot. Just sit out there and look for birds.
I kind of looked at it. It's not bad. I like this mirror here.
Yeah, this place is pretty high Victorian. But there was like 15 people living in this house when we bought it.
Really?
Yeah, it was pretty much a mess. We had to do a whole lot of stuff to it to get it in shape. But, you know, small houses, small rooms, you cluttered up fast.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, so what was the other... When you were talking, I was just thinking about how I just did a presentation in my art and ritual class. I don't know if you've met a man named Oner Ozturk who works here at Columbia. And I just adore his class so much because it's about, like, you know, rituals and, like, the ancient eras and stuff. And so my presentation was on, you know, cinema as a ritual and how the ritual is, I guess, dying is my claim because people aren't, like, going to the theaters like they used to. And I was just curious about, like, after you were talking about digital and stuff, like, what your opinions are on, from, like, a technical standpoint or an aesthetic standpoint, digital versus film or
Oh, yeah.
that kind of thing.
Sure. Well, you know, I mean, I came up in strictly in analog film world, and that's how I learned. And so I really love the aesthetic of film, and it ties in with that idea of us going into a dark room communally and experiencing the same thing and being an audience. It's much like live performance in that way. So I really think there's value in it. I don't know if it's necessarily going away because theaters seem to be sustained and people are willing to spend the money. I do think that the brain processes digital imaging differently than film, the way it's projected. I think we experience it differently. I can't quite put my finger on it, but there is something different about it. I don't think it's bad. I really appreciate the fact that as far as the making side of it, that being able to do things electronically and digitally have given many more people access to the ability to express themselves visually, and I really like that. But I also miss the tactile part of dealing with film, and I think that there's certain things that can be done in the physical world and optically that aren't the same as the digital simulations of the same things. I mean, light behaves differently in the physical world, and so I have an appreciation for that. And while cameras and camera systems have gotten smaller and lighter and everything, I do think that there reaches a point where the basic components that give you the most control over the image and how to image require a certain physical presence of the camera, like being able to manipulate the aperture and the focal length and the focus and the shutter speed and the sensitivity of whatever media that you're recording onto. Those are the basic components that you need in order to really control the image and direct the audience's attention. And like, especially this business about, oh, you can do anything on a camera phone now. Yeah, you can. I mean, it's pretty great, and it's very accessible and all that. But I do think that there are limits as far as cinematically how you can control the image when you're using a phone. But it has its own aesthetic, and I won't deny that. In fact, I appreciate it. It's just that you have to recognize that it has its own aesthetic. You don't want to fool yourself into thinking that, oh, I can make a David Lean film on an iPhone. It's just not going to happen, But it is what it is. It's its own thing, and a lot of times people, especially in cinematography, they kind of fret about, oh, should I be shooting this on 4K and blah 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 blah, and it's like, well, it depends on where you're going to display the image. That's the most important factor in deciding how you're going to film something. Is are they going to be looking at it on a phone? It doesn't matter if you shoot it on 4K or not, But if it's going to be on a really big screen, yeah, maybe it could be more important. So I don't know if that answers your.
Mm-hmm. So would you say that you're, I mean, this is a pretty blatant question, but would you say that you're fearful of death in the end, or do you think that you've understood how to live your life to not be fearful of it?
No, I mean, because I've seen enough people die to know that there's there's all kinds of different ways that you can die, and none of them are pleasant, but some of them are extremely unpleasant. So yeah, I mean, you can't help but be fearful of death. Actually, I don't know if I'm fearful of death from the idea of the concept of ceasing to exist. I mean, it's really alien. That part of it, and it's odd when I think about, like, I've had a couple of people who were friends of mine die recently, and it's odd that they're gone. Like, you think about them and you're like, oh yeah, you can't really pick up the phone and just talk to them. I used to Skype this one friend of mine every 2 weeks, and we would talk for hours. He's gone now, and so that's weird. But it's the actual process of dying. Like, I have a friend of mine who's dying right now in New York. He's in hospice, and so we Skyped each other or FaceTimed each other 2 weeks ago, and it's an odd sensation to be having a conversation with somebody that is not going to be around in a month or two, and it's kind of shocking, actually. And he's in a situation where he's suffering, but it's not. I mean, it's so subjective. How what's the degree of suffering? He's in a palliative care situation that's probably the ideal as far as avoiding really horrible suffering. Like, my wife had a boss who died of pancreatic cancer, and it was the most agonizing, horrible death you could imagine. So that part of it, yeah, it's terrifying, especially you get to be my age. I'm 60. It's like, oh, well, how many more years do you got? 10, 20, 25 years? That's being really optimistic, but who knows? My mom's 85. It's possible, I suppose. But then you look at it, so to what degree of decrepitude do you want to advance to before it's like, this is getting ridiculous. So when you get to be a certain age, it's like, okay, the finite's here. And but the concept of, is the world going to suddenly implode because I cease to exist? No, definitively not. So I don't know. I don't think you can help but be afraid of death only from the standpoint of the possibility, the endless possibilities of suffering, and you know, I think for many people, you spend your life trying to retain as much freedom and autonomy as possible. Like that's to me the ideal. You know, not having to answer to others, not having to take on responsibilities unless you choose to take them on for whatever reasons. You know, being independent, being able to go places when you want to go to and do things when you want to do them, and all that. And of course, you make sacrifices because you choose to have other people dependent on you. You make choices to delimit your autonomy in order to be rewarded by material things or whatever. I mean, you make these trade-offs your whole life, but at a certain point, when your physical being starts to deteriorate, then you become delimited and dependent yourself, and that can be terrifying, you know, and frustrating, and people get angry about it, and you know, all those things come into play, and so yeah, you do think about that, you know, so yeah, it can be pretty scary.
So do you have a high like tolerance for pain, or are you also? Because I have a lot of friends that are very paranoid of and go to like the doctor all the time. I don't know why, but I have a not a lot, but like I have a handful. Or would you say that you're, I don't know, health freak or not, or I'm not sure really.
No, I mean, I don't ignore. I think it's foolish and can be disastrous to ignore, like certain health issues, or like for example, high blood pressure runs in my family, and so I have addressed that. I take medication for it. I see my doctor regularly for it. um, I have I had most of my thyroid removed because of a cyst back about 25 years ago. I have to take thyroid medication for it. I have to have that checked regularly. Um, so there's certain things you have to attend to, and I go to my doctor every 6 months, and I take medications religiously, if you want for an atheist to say that. But I mean, I'm attentive to it, but I'm not paranoid about it. Like, I think people who like, um, go to the doctor every time they get a cold, or if they, uh, you can't ignore symptoms, but on the other hand, I think you have to be realistic about it. And um, I could do things. I could be better. I mean, I'm not like an exercise freak. I should be probably, but I'm not. And I could like probably not. I probably could lose some weight. I know I should lose some weight, and there's other things like that. But on the other hand, I'm not gonna ignore like the one guy that he's a mutual friend. He passed away in January. He smoked constantly. He drank a huge amount of booze all the time. He physically just deteriorated to the point where his heart started to fail, and it was just a train wreck, and he died. And he had he had twin daughters who were like 17 who were dependent on him, and he was a brilliant guy, and he just let it go. I think he was depressed actually, but I look at that and it's like I'm sympathetic because I think underlying there was an issue of depression there, but I also think it's like he was younger than me. He was like 56, I think, and it's like holy shit, you know, you can go down a slippery slope really fast when you get over the age of 50, and things can just go really wrong if you're not attentive. So yeah, it's terrifying, and the consequences are indelible. That's it. He's gone. You know, We watched it happen. My buddy and I were with him the night before he died. My buddy was with him the night he died, and it's just weird to go see somebody and talk to them, and then the next day they're gone. So from that, and that happens a lot as you get older. So yeah, you have to be on it. You can't just ignore things, I guess. We all delude ourselves to a certain point, though, don't we? What, you have friends who are like hypochondriacs? I chose the commercial route because I liked it here, and was the best avenue, and I liked the creative challenge of it. It was super fun, and it worked well for me. But it didn't stop me from making other types of films all the way along. What are you doing? You're gonna be a character in this film, Sandy. You're a character. Anyway, he gets bored. So, yeah, I don't know. It's funny. But then I'm always surprised too. There'll be certain students that I'll see who I think, I don't know if they're really gonna seriously pursue this, and then they end up doing it. So, hey, knock it off. Yeah, I get these students who surprise me. You're terrible for continuity, dog. Oh, now you want to play. All right. Sorry, no more squeaking. No, Sandy, stop. You're a nut. Will you stop? Are you done? Huh? No. God. All right, come here. Come here. I got you now. You're all mine. You're like a meatloaf. You're like a small, furry meatloaf. All right. Just being like, you see that pigeon over there? She's like, I'm surprised she isn't chasing it. Usually she's all over it. This big black cat came in the yard today and just sat there and stared at her, and she freaked out and ran down the stairs after it. This cat lives around here. He's on the hunt all the time. And I feed birds, I put out suet blocks, so he's coming over, the cat's coming over because he wants to see if he can get himself a bird. And I've got woodpeckers right now. They've been coming around every day. I had like 4 different woodpeckers here this morning, hanging out in the tree, getting the suet blocks. Up until a certain point in the 80s, adding titles or repositioning images or adding visual effects in post-production to film was a optical and mechanical and photochemical process. So you would shoot footage, and then you would take that footage and you would re-photograph it using mats and using different types of optical manipulation in order to add those things to it. So, I mean, just a simple example would be when you watch a television commercial now, the titles that you see superimposed over images, including the little disclaimers and all that stuff, that all had to be introduced optically in spots. And much of the work that I did in opticals were for commercials, and about the early '80s, there were electronic means to do that via video that supplanted or replaced uh, the optical process and took away a lot of that business. So, so then the revenue decreased, and it was funny because I remember I think I I stopped working for the optical house I worked for in fall of '80, and I graduated in '81, spring of '81. But that ended in fall of '80, and I remember the owner of the company being interviewed in Screen Magazine, and they asked him how much longer he thought opticals would be around, and he said, "Well, we'll probably another 5 years," and the company was closed within a year.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it wasn't sustainable on that level, and a few like one man shops stuck around longer, but not on the scale that we were doing it. But when it was really going on, it was super cool. It was a great, thing to know how to do, and it was very highly technical skill. I was trained by a guy named Fred Pack, who was an Austrian guy who was a very stern taskmaster. He was rough, but he really made sure you just knew exactly what the hell you were doing. It was a very stressful job. You would get all the elements, all the layout design was all done in a separate department, and they would deliver all the materials to you, and you would shoot all day. I was on the second shift in the afternoon, so I'd shoot all the way up to the lab, cut off at midnight. We deliver the material, and then the next morning, well, actually it was a little bit hinky because some mornings there'd be client screenings, and even though I'd be shooting till midnight, I'd have to come in, and then you'd sit there, and the bosses would sit behind you with the clients, and they would sit there and point out every flaw, and you just kind of had to sit there and take notes, and it was very stressful. And one thing it did train me, which to this day I kind of can do, is I can watch film and notice flaws that are only like a frame long. I can see little things, and I'm always scanning the periphery of images, like mics and shot and all that kind of thing. I see it. My wife kind of is that way too, but both of us will be like, oh, mic and shot, that kind of thing. But I mean, nowadays a lot of the things you take for granted, like if there is a flaw like that, you can take it into like After Effects or Nuke or something like that, and you can reposition it.
Yeah.
And it's a few clicks and you can do it. You had to do that optically before. I remember, the Coen Brothers, that movie Blood Simple. Have you ever seen that?
Yeah.
I remember going to a DGA screening down at, there's a smaller theater above the Chicago Theater that's like a private screening room.
Oh, okay.
And I remember going with a friend who was a member of the DGA to see it, an early DGA screening of that film, and they had not done any of that, any of the fixes. So there were like all these shots where like you could see the dolly in the shot and all this stuff, and that was common, like it was a kind of a pre-press screening or a pre-DGA screening, and so yeah. That's a cool place, actually. I got to go see some pretty awesome screenings there.
Yeah. Are there other memorable screenings you've been to in your life? Because I feel like, at least at Columbia, I just feel like I'm getting into better and better positions to be at like really legendary events. Like for instance, on Monday, Paul Schrader is going to be at the Music Box to show the film First Reformed, which he just wrote and directed.
Really?
Yeah, he's going to do like a Q&A afterwards.
That's wild, because he was one of those people who was saying that, basically the ability to make serious film is over, and he was really like calling it, and now he's making films again. That's pretty awesome, actually. Um, yeah, actually, that same screening room, I went to another DGA screening a friend brought me to, and it was a movie with Danny DeVito and Arnold Schwarzenegger called Twins.
Right.
It's a comedy, and so we go there, and Siskel is there, and Ebert's there, and Rosenbaum's there, and we're all waiting for Oprah and her entourage because she was having Arnold Schwarzenegger, I think, on the show the next day, and she had to see the film. So she's late, and we're all waiting, and Siskel and Ebert are down in the front going, and Ebert goes out. And this was during a period of time when Oprah was a spokesperson for a product called Slim Fast. It was a dieting drink. And she had lost all this weight. So he comes back, and he's got a brown paper bag. And she comes finally with her entourage. They take up a whole row. And he goes over and starts talking to her. And he pulls out an Italian beef sandwich. And he starts eating it in front of her. And everyone's like, what the fuck? And so then he goes back down, and he sits down with Siskel, and they're both like laughing. And I guess what it was Siskel had bet Ebert that he wouldn't do it. And they did it. He did it. He says, I'll bet you won't eat an Italian beef sandwich in front of Oprah while she's on this diet. So it was pretty sick. But yeah. I don't know, yeah, other screenings. I mean, I don't know. I've been to Chicago Film Festival, I don't know, 5 years ago. Uma Thurman came to for a screening as part of the film festival of a film she was in, and I can't remember the name of it now, but my friend Steve Jones had co-produced Mad Dog and Glory with her and De Niro and Bill Murray, and so I don't think he'd seen her since then, but she was so nice, really gracious to him when they met up there, I was talking to somebody the other day about how odd it is that you'll see really great, significant films at festivals that never get U.S. distribution, and you'll be like, whatever happened to that really cool Japanese comedy I saw, or whatever happened to this, and they'll be like, you just never see them, and I think in some ways, like the art house cinema system or experience has declined in this country. Like, I don't think as many people see foreign films as they used to. I mean, I could be wrong, but it just seems like that. I can't tell you the number of people I speak to nowadays who are like, I never watch any films with subtitles. I'm like, what? Seriously? Yeah. And I just think that's so odd, It's like, why would you not want to see films from other parts of the world? The cultural perspective, if nothing else,
Yeah.
But you see that all the time now. I don't know why. Yeah, that's all I really think of. I mean, I'm sure there's ones I'll think of later, but what else? Anything? That was a whip. This that my friend brought back from the wild in West Virginia. All these trees, I planted all these trees from little whips.
Yeah, one redwood that I planted in Michigan was really small.
Yeah, they can too. What you into today? Yeah. All right. Well, listen. You're in town till what?
Tonight. I got a whole
Jesus. Don't move. This is my daughter when she was 6 years old.
Oh, this.
And now she's about to turn 26. It's 20 years ago what my daughter looked like. My friend Dieter Wagner drew that. This house was built in 1893, and we've lived here 24 years. It's just a kind of a working man's cottage. It was built the same year as the Columbian Exposition, and we chose it because it was the cheapest house we could afford that was still a standalone house in the city. And I don't like to commute. At the time we bought the house, I was working at a studio just east of here at LaSalle and Huron. So it was an easy straight shot for me just to walk down to the Chicago Avenue bus and go to the studio. So it's worked out really well, and it's one of the reasons we've stuck here is because it's just, I don't like spending time going from one place to another. And I'll turn my phone off. Make sure that we don't get any rings. What would you like to know?